While questioners are organizing their questions in their mind, I'd like to ask one question, and that is, do you really think there was that much of a linguistic difference between the statute in ATA and the statute in Riverkeeper? I mean, it seemed to me that I could easily write, I mean, I wouldn't do it as well as Scalia did it in ATA, but I could write a claim in Riverkeeper that Congress does not hide elephants in mouse holes, and there wasn't a favorable clue in the statute for cost-benefit analysis. And the language, as you say, which you quoted, that would seem to cut the other way, seemed to me at least as powerful as the language which was found in ATA to preclude cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, I think when we were I was with the government when we were litigating Riverkeeper, and I thought that probably the best argument we had was not just the statutory standard of best technology available for minimizing adverse environmental impact. I mean, we had decent arguments. Could explain, for example, that the best technology available for winterizing my lawnmower, if my lawnmower costs $400, that's not going to be a $500 fluid. Even if the $500 fluid was by far the best way to winterize a lawnmower, it's not going to be the best way to winterize a lawnmower that costs less than that. So we had some linguistic arguments that there was flexibility in these terms. Minimize as well. Minimize, some people would mean to take all the way down to zero, but normally, in normal usage, talking about minimize, you're thinking about, well, reducing to some reasonable level. But I thought that was our hook for getting going. I thought, though, reading statutes as a whole, of course, you look beyond the basic statutory standard. And probably the best thing we had going for us in Riverkeeper was that there were a number of other best technology standards in the Act that had some of which required cost-benefit analysis, which showed that at a minimum such analysis was not inconsistent with the best technology standard. Others of which arguably did not permit it. What this all showed is that when Congress spoke more directly to the issue, sometimes it would go the one way, sometimes it would go the other way in the same statute. Whereas with this statute for water intake, Congress just tossed out this one phrase and left the rest alone. So our argument was that that was a pretty clear delegation of gap-filling authority to the agency to fill in this statute in a way that Congress had separately filled in others. And I thought that was probably the best argument we had at the time.
Yeah. All right, and as I say, priority given to those who wish to pose questions that suggest how awful the cost-benefit analysis is. Yes.
I'm not sure I'm going to meet your standard. I had two quick questions. Natural resource damage is used for polluters, and I wondered, since at least last time I researched this, that the way they came to how much the damages were worth, they had a scheme where they asked people who didn't live anywhere near the place where the damage had occurred what they would pay for a cleaner river. And if they said that they would pay $10, then they would extrapolate from those tested and then come up with a huge number, which was to be given to the federal government. Is there some element of that going on in cost-benefit analysis to figure out what the value of the cleaner resource would be? And so that's just an open-ended question. And my other part of this is, if it might cost more money, but the technology is made here, and then, so it's jobs here, does that also get figured into cost-benefit analysis? Thank you.
Well, I'll take a crack at the existence value question. So that's the practice that you're talking about there. Is, I think there's two pieces of that. One is the question of how you value non-market type goods like natural resources, whether they should be valued at all. And then the second question is, how do you actually carry it out? What's the kind of analytic technique that's a good idea to do that? And the way that you mentioned, and it's often how it's done, is basically through surveys. Contingent valuation surveys is what they're called. So on the first question, I tend to agree. I tend to think that natural resources should be given a positive value when they have value to people in cost-benefit analysis. There's actually several different ways that you could try to do that, contingent valuation surveys being the most most common. Another candidate that is kind of up and coming way of doing this is through a technique called ecosystem services. And so you would look at a wetland for its water filtration potential. Ecosystem services is widely thought about in the context of a greenhouse gas regulation, carbon sinks, offsets, things that you can do with agriculture to increase the amount of carbon that's being sequestered in the soil, and those are all kind of ecosystem services. So that's a methodology that's growing. On the contingent valuation surveys, these surveys themselves are somewhat controversial in terms of kind of what results are you getting out from them. I think the argument in favor of these surveys is, well, if people have a preference for, and they assign a value to a natural resource, there's kind of no a priori reason why we should just disregard that value. So the question really becomes a question of instrument design, survey design. How do you do it? And there's methodologies on this. This is, economists and natural resource economics and environmental economics get their dissertations done on these kinds of survey designs. There was a big panel that was chaired by Ken Arrow, and that looked at these kinds of instruments for doing natural resource damage assessment. And they basically found that while imperfect, they could be designed in the right way to actually generate meaningful outcomes. There's other ones where you get meaningless outcomes, of course. I think another area that you'll see some growth in this is the use of experimental economics to improve the quality of the results that you get out of these surveys. So, just sending people a survey might not be the best way. They might be trying to impress the person who is actually asking them the questions. There's all these kind of problems. You get different results if you have a computer do it. If you give them money and they're kind of playing with real money, you get different results, although not actually radically different results, but so you still get kind of positive results, but they are different. So I think those kind of design issues will come up more and more in the future.
Let me just a practical footnote to that. If you had asked me 5 or 10 years ago, I would have said that it would be that willingness to pay surveys would be the dominant form of what we'd see for valuing environmental benefits. Because if you look at the literature, the environmental economists are focusing a lot of their energy in that area. In the government, I did not see contingent valuation surveys driving. I can't think of a single regulation. That was the 2-year window that I was at OMB. I can't think of a single regulation that was driven by that. That may change, but it was something that surprised me. And I forget your second question, and I don't know if we're...
Local jobs.
Oh, jobs.
I think to a certain extent, but not as explicit, not terribly explicitly.
Similar question on the scope. I think the scope of cost-benefit analysis. It's not really the area of my practice, so it's a fairly basic question, but it strikes me, aside from the reported legal boundaries or disputes about whether an agency is permitted or required or not permitted to perform cost-benefit analysis, strikes me that the definition of what you're going to include as a cost and how you're going to measure it, and what you're going to include as a benefit and how you're going to measure that, is the key question, because what you include is going to give you the result of whether the particular regulation creates more, quote, good than harm. For example, a specific question, is opportunity cost included in cost-benefit regulatory analysis? That is, the jobs not formed, the growth not created, the wealth not created, the disease not prevented because of a particular regulation.
That's the goal. If you look at the regulatory impact analysis guidance, both that OMB issued after receiving public comment and EPA has its own for environmental rules, the goal is to be looking at the opportunity costs. So that's not always achieved because it's a lot easier to look at engineering costs of installing a certain piece of equipment without thinking about the opportunity cost. But that's the goal. And the goal is to try to be as broad and inclusive as you can, including costs and benefits that are hard to quantify. Those should also be included in the analysis, because what you're trying to get is to lay out everything that we know, both the positive things and the negative